The one-year countdown to the federal election has officially begun. Canadians have 12 months to decide whether to hand the Liberals a second mandate or pass the torch to another party. Unless the government decides to call an early election, Canadians will head to the polls on October 21st, 2019. That's according to fixed election date legislation passed by the previous government. If you're counting down, that's in 364 days, just under 1 year away. Speaking to supporters yesterday, Conservative leader Andrew Scheer predicted a tough and, quote, nasty fight. So where do the parties sit in the polls and just how nasty could things get? CBC Polls analyst Eric Grenier joins me now in studio. Hi, Eric. Nice to see you. So take us through, where do the polls stand right now?
Well, they still show that it is a pretty close race between the Liberals and the Conservatives, but the Liberals right now have the edge in our weighted averages. So let's take a look at those overall numbers nationwide, where the parties stand. Then we still have the Liberals at about 36.5% support. The Conservatives are at 34%. The New Democrats at 17%, the Greens at 6%, the Bloc Québécois at 4%. And we have the People's Party. We're starting to see some polls with them, but right now they're just at 1%. And if we look at where things have moved over the last few months, you can see that for a while the Conservatives and the Liberals were trading the lead back and forth, but it was the Liberals who really widened the gap over the summer. It's coming back a little bit with the Conservatives, a bit of an uptick, and the New Democrats are pretty flat. But you can see where the trend line is, that it is very close, it is pretty volatile, but right now the Liberals still do seem to have the edge.
Walk us through regional support, maybe from west to east.
Well, because at the regional level, this is why the Liberals would still be favored to win a majority government, or at least they'd have a very good shot at it. And we can start, as you said, in the west, where you can see that the Liberals still have a lead in British Columbia. Not too much movement there since the last election. I have about a 6-point edge over the Conservatives. The Greens at 11%, that is where they're the strongest. And Alberta and in the prairies, the Conservatives, of course, very strong there, as they have been for some time. We haven't seen a lot of movement in the polls in Western Canada. So now let's move to Central Canada and in the east. And this is where the Liberals would likely be able to win a majority government if the election were held today. They have that 5-point lead right now in Ontario. They're up by 19 points in Quebec over the Conservatives, and they have the edge in Atlantic Canada. And we've seen that the provincial elections in Ontario and Quebec have had a bit of an impact on the numbers, where the Liberals were coming down in Ontario when the provincial Liberals got that very catastrophic defeat. They've been able to recover some of that support, and right now they do seem to have a little bit of a headache, let's say, from the Quebec Liberal performance in the provincial election. Still seeing Liberal numbers a little bit weaker there, and the Bloc has actually picked up a bit. But sometimes in provincial elections, there's a bit of a confusion, a ballot confusion for voters between the federal and the provincial levels. So these things can tend to wear off after some time. So that'll be something to keep an eye on. But because the Liberals still have that edge in Ontario, and particularly in Quebec, they're still in a strong position.
Speaking of those provincial elections, like New Brunswick, like Quebec, what we did see was sort of this idea that the mainstream traditional type of parties don't have to be the go-to, and that there is an appetite for something outside of them. How might that translate federally?
It could have a big impact on the next election. The Greens and the People's Party would be the two ones to look at, because the Green Party, we've seen provincial breakthroughs in Ontario, in New Brunswick. They're leading in the polls provincially in Prince Edward Island. So that opens up a lot of opportunities for the Green Party in the next election. Could they have a surprise and win some more seats on Vancouver Island? Could you look at a riding like Guelph, where Mike Schreiner, the provincial Green leader, won his seat in the provincial election? Fredericton as well, where the provincial leader in New Brunswick won his, PEI. That could open up a lot of things and really kind of confuse the electoral map. For the People's Party, Maxime Bernier, we saw that his party's so far not registering very much in the polls, but we've also seen that in the Nanos poll that was out last week, 11% of Canadians said they would consider voting for Maxime Bernier's party. That's about the same amount of Canadians who say they have a good opinion of Maxime Bernier. So if he's able to convert as much as half of those voters, get 5–6% of the vote, that could have a big impact on the overall map. But right now, he's not having that impact. But we've seen that voters seem to be, they're shopping around, they're a little volatile right now. So they are, those two parties would be ones to watch for the next election.
I want to pick up on that and the idea of voter sort of volatility, if you want to call it that, or just keeping their options open. Andrew Scheer, as we said off the top there, said this would potentially be a very nasty or a nasty campaign. How might the campaign, how much can the numbers move, and how might that sort of manifest during the campaign?
Yeah, because it could be a very close election, a very volatile election, I wouldn't be surprised if things get a little heated. We have seen as recently as December, the Liberals were ahead by as much as 8 points. The Conservatives were ahead by about 4 points in March, so that's a big swing in just a few months. So that can certainly happen. The Liberals are in a good position in the sense that historically, over the last election since the Second World War, the party that's leading a year out, they win 3/4 of the time. So that historical precedent is working for the Liberals. But in terms of how the next campaign could be pretty nasty, pretty dirty, when you think about how the debate is expanding beyond the federal leaders, we're seeing Justin Trudeau, Doug Ford now getting into it, the carbon tax plan that we're going to hear about tomorrow. I'm not sure that Doug Ford's going to like that the federal Liberals might be sending checks to his own constituents that the provincial government's not going to be able to have any credit for. Jason Kenney maybe next year coming in Alberta. Jason Kenney, Doug Ford, if the federal Liberals decide they want to campaign against provincial leaders, those are two provincial leaders that aren't going to mince words in terms of what they think about the Prime Minister. So it is setting up to be what could be a pretty competitive campaign, volatile campaign, and that can often mean it can be a pretty nasty one too.
And how much do campaigns matter? And I say because anecdotally, I always say everything can. First of all, a year out, anything can happen. But even a month out, I mean, we've seen it before. There are examples, but when it comes to the numbers, how much can it matter?
Well, it can matter a huge deal. We've seen campaigns, federal campaigns, where a party can pick up 10, 15 points in the course of a month. We've also seen campaigns where nothing really moves around and things are where they were at the beginning. So we don't know ahead of time what it's going to be like. But yes, these are the numbers right now. The historical precedent might be good for the Liberals, but it's still pretty close. And yeah, don't take anything for granted.
Okay, good advice. I'll leave it there. Thanks a lot, Eric, the CBC Polls analyst Eric Grenier.